alternative in January. Well, any investor knows the market can take you on a wild ride, but one of the trickiest is the currency market. Joe Arity of downtown-based Bannockburn talked about how they fared during the pandemic with Courier reporter Steve Watkins.
Thanks, Kyla, and thanks for being here, Joe.
Pleasure to be here, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah, so many people have seen how the stock market has been so dramatically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. When they look at their 401ks or their other stock portfolios, I mean, there's no question it's had a big impact. What has the pandemic done as far as currency markets, though? People don't know as much about that.
Yeah, Steve, and the currency markets have been moving quite rapidly, as you might expect as well. You know, all financial markets are impacted by this pandemic. Volatilities, if you look back to January, at the start of the year, they were pretty subdued. And by the time we got to, say, March or April, which many people are considering the height of the pandemic, those volatilities had doubled or even tripled. And so, you know, exchange rates are skewed, things are pretty extreme, and that can mean a lot for companies doing business abroad.
Sure. So let's talk about that a little more. What does that volatility mean for, let's say, a local business that is doing business internationally?
Well, it can go both ways, kind of depending on which direction they are. So I'll give you two examples. Let's say you're a local company here and you have an operation down in Mexico, a manufacturing facility. Back in January, $1 bought about 19 pesos. At the height of the pandemic in March and again early April, that exchange rate spiked all the way to north of 25 pesos to the dollar. So what that meant really is there was a 35-ish% decrease in the operating costs of that facility down in Mexico in US dollar terms. So that was a big positive for a lot of companies if they had that direction. On the flip side, you might be a company that exports to Canada and you collect those receivables in Canadian funds. Now, similar to the Mexican peso, the Canadian dollar also depreciated, not quite as much, but when oil traded negative, you may remember that back in April, the Canadian dollar, which is extremely tied to oil, also fell precipitously. And so the biggest differential we saw from low to high point in the dollar's value against the Canadian was about a 12% move. So again, if you're a company here that's exporting into Canada, you had a 12% hit to your bottom line on a dollar equivalent basis. What we try to generally tell our clients is to have a sound and simple hedging strategy in place before the volatility and movement sets in so that you don't have that unknown variable impacting your business.
That makes a lot of sense. Finally, what do you see happening the rest of the year with the US dollar? How do you see that trending?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, right? And I wish we all had those answers. Currency markets, in my personal view, are one of the more unpredictable markets in the financial scope. You know, as the pandemic has, in some people's view, lessened, and I would say that only from the standpoint that economies are opening up, people are allowed to go outside to some extent, you know, that helped the overall outlook. And the dollar, when that happens, actually tends to decline in value. When the pandemic gets worse and the lockdowns maybe come back into play, that's usually a flight to quality and the dollar gets stronger. So that's kind of the push and pull that we're seeing. And it's a little bit counterintuitive. So again, positive economic outcomes based on the lockdowns easing is typically dollar negative and vice versa. The big wild card later this year, we have the election, and currencies typically don't like political uncertainty. So if the election race is tight, I would think that the dollar would likely decline. And put that against the backdrop of which way the virus is trending, and people can make good decisions based on those factors.
Okay, it'll be something to watch the rest of the year. Well, thanks for being here, Joe.